My greedy family sued for the $500,000 inheritance. I got the trash worth $52 million. Look, I need to tell you about the dumbest thing I ever hated in my life. Not a person, not an ex-girlfriend, a piece of canvas, a tarp, a dirty, stiff, paint-covered piece of garbage that my grandfather insisted on keeping in the corner of our garage like it was some kind of family heirloom. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 months before everything went to hell, I was standing in that garage with my grandfather, Arthur, putting the final polish on a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. You know, when you spend 3 months wiping down every single inch of metal, you stop seeing a car, you see a clock. Every hour we spent together, every weekend, every late night under those fluorescent lights, all of it was baked into that paint job. The Boss 429 was not just some classic muscle car. It was our temple, our church, the place where we actually talked instead of sitting in front of the TV like zombies. Gramps was 82, but his hands were steadier than mine when he worked the torque wrench. Click, click, click. That sound, I can still hear it. We had the radio playing Miles Davis on this ancient transistor that probably survived World War II. The garage smelled like WD-40, old wood, and that specific scent of motor oil that never quite leaves your skin no matter how hard you scrub. The Mustang was done. Perfect. Raven black with finish. So deep it looked like you could drown in it. Chrome that could blind you if the sun hit it right. We stood back and just looked at it for a solid minute without saying anything. That's how you know something's special, when you don't need to talk about it. Then Gramps said he wanted to cover it up for the night, and that's when he pulled out the tarp. This thing, God, where do I even start? It was heavy as a corpse, stiff like cardboard that got left in the rain and dried out wrong, covered in layers of old paint, cracked and peeling, rough as alligator skin. I'm not exaggerating when I say I tripped over the damn thing twice trying to drag it from a corner where it lived. It scraped across the concrete floor, making this sound like nails on a chalkboard. That sound still shows up in my nightmares sometimes. And here's the kicker. It scratched the paint. I could see thin little lines on the hood after we used it. Microscopic, sure, but we had just spent 3 months making this car perfect. Now, this prehistoric tarp was putting scratches on it, like it was trying to ruin everything on purpose. I told Gramps we should buy a proper car cover. You know, the soft fabric kind that actually protects the finish. They sell them at AutoZone for like $40. He looked at me like I just suggested we burn down the garage. He told me that rag had survived more history than I had years on this earth. Said he brought it back from some place called Springs in the 50s. Said it was staying. I thought to myself, Gramps, you're losing it. This is garbage. A dirty tarp that belongs in a dumpster. But when someone's 82, you don't argue about trash. You just gnaw it and move on. So that's what I did. 2 weeks before Gramps died, a beat-up 2003 Honda Civic rolled into the garage. Engine shaking like an alcoholic, trying to quit cold turkey. Behind the wheel was this college girl, maybe 22, with paint under her fingernails and that stress look students get around finals week. Her name was Mia, art history major at the local community college. She said she could pay $50 for a tune-up. I had a choice. Turn her away or do the human thing. Gramps was in the corner organizing his collection of rusty nails. He refused to throw away. He looked at me and nodded. So I changed her spark plugs, air filter, oil. Took me 3 hours. She tried to pay me more. I refused. Told her when she got rich someday to remember who helped her out. God, I had no idea how prophetic that joke would turn out to be. Mia started stopping by after that, bringing coffee sometimes, just saying hi. She'd watch me and Gramps work, ask questions about carburetors and timing chains like she actually cared. It was nice having someone around who wasn't family, someone who didn't want anything from me. But that was all about a change. Gramps died on a Tuesday. Heart attack. Quick and clean, the way he would have wanted it. No hospital, no tubes, no suffering. He was working on a lawnmower engine in the garage and just sat down in his chair, and that was it. I found him an hour later when I came home from a brake job I was doing across town. The funeral was small, maybe 15 people. Gramps didn't believe in big productions. No fancy casket, no elaborate ceremony. Simple pine box, quick service, done. What wasn't simple was what happened right after. The will reading was scheduled for the same day. The lawyer's office smelled like old carpet and desperation. My parents Steve and Karen sat on one side. My brother Kyle sat next to them, already dressed like he was going to a nightclub later. Cheap cologne that could choke a horse. I sat on the other side by myself. The lawyer read through the standard stuff. Then he got to the part that mattered. Gramps left me the house and the garage with everything in it, all contents included. Tools, equipment, the Mustang, everything, to my parents and Kyle. He left his life insurance policy. You know how much that was worth? $8,000. Total, for 3 people. My mother had been planning a Caribbean cruise. She thought there'd be at least $200,000 sitting there. Instead, they got enough money to buy a used Honda. Maybe. The temperature in that office dropped about 40 degrees. My mother's face went from funeral sadness to pure rage in about 2 seconds. My father's jaw clenched so hard, I thought his teeth might crack. Kyle just stared at me like I'd personally robbed him. We all walked out to the parking lot. That's when things got real. My father told me that Mustang was worth $500,000. He knew because I told him about it, explaining how rare the Boss 429 was, how much work we put in. He called it their retirement fund. Not my car, their retirement fund. I said Gramps left it to me. My father actually laughed. Said Gramps wasn't in his right mind the last 2 years. Said they'd prove it. My mother's heels clicked on the concrete. Sharp, aggressive. She walked right up to me, close enough I could smell her perfume mixed with rage. Told me I was selfish. Told me I'd manipulated an old man. Told me family doesn't do this to family. Kyle said he'd already planned which girls he was going to take for rides in that Mustang. Like it was already his. Like the will didn't matter. I didn't yell back. I never do. I just stood there and let them get it out of their system. When you grow up as the black sheep of the family, the one who works with his hands instead of getting a college degree, the one who chose trade school over university, you get used to being treated like you're second class. This wasn't new. It was just louder. 3 days later, they hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Some shark from 2 towns over who specialized in estate litigation. This guy wore a suit that probably cost more than my truck. He sent me a letter outlining their case. They were claiming undue influence. Said I'd pressured Gramps into changing his will. They also threw in something called lack of testamentary capacity, basically arguing that Gramps was senile and didn't understand what he was doing when he signed that will. In America, this is standard operating procedure. You claim the dead person was mentally incompetent. Boom. Everything freezes. Probate court gets involved. The process can drag on for years. And while it's dragging, the assets are locked up. Nobody gets anything. You just sit there bleeding money on legal fees while nothing moves forward. The lawyer's letter explained they'd be filing in probate court within 30 days. They'd present evidence of Gramps' declining mental state. They had witnesses, apparently, neighbors who'd testify he was forgetful, his doctor who'd note some memory issues in his records. Never mind that Gramps could rebuild a carburetor from memory at age 80. Never mind that he balanced his checkbook to the penny every month. Never mind that he was sharper than most people half his age. None of that mattered. Because in court, all you need is doubt. You don't need proof. Just doubt. I went to the garage that night. Sat there in the dark with just a street light coming through the window. The Mustang sat there under that stupid tarp, covered up like a body at a crime scene. I pulled the corner back just to see the paint one more time. That black, that perfect mirror finish black that we'd spent weeks getting exactly right. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion, from the weight of knowing what was coming, because I'd seen this before. I'd watched other families tear themselves apart over money, over houses, over cars, over anything that had a dollar sign attached to it. The thing about being poor, really poor, is that you see everything through a price tag. My parents looked at that Mustang and saw their retirement. They saw cruises and golf clubs and maybe a timeshare in Florida. They saw freedom from the crappy jobs they'd worked their whole lives. I looked at that Mustang and saw my grandfather's hands guiding mine on a wrench when I was 12. I saw Saturday mornings and terrible coffee and lessons about patience, about doing things right, about the difference between value and price. But you can't explain that to people who spent their whole lives counting pennies. To them, I was sitting on $500,000 while they got enough for a used car. The math didn't work in their favor, so they were going to change the math. Over the next week, the calls started. My mother would phone me at midnight, crying, telling me I was destroying the family, that Gramps would be ashamed, that I was stealing from them. Kyle left voicemails saying he was going to contest everything, that he'd drag this out until I gave up, that he had time and they had money for lawyers. My father didn't call. He just showed up at the garage one afternoon, walked right in without knocking, stood there in his work boots with his arms crossed. He told me this was my last chance to do the right thing, to be reasonable, to remember that blood was thicker than water. I asked him what the right thing was. He said to sell the Mustang and split the money, give them their fair share, keep the house, keep the tools, keep the memories, but give them the cash from the car. I said no, not because I want to keep the money. Hell, I didn't even know if I could afford to maintain a car that valuable. Insurance alone would probably bankrupt me. But because Gramps left it to me specifically, he wrote that 3 years ago when he was still driving himself to the hardware store, when he was still sharp as a tack, he knew what he was doing. My father's face changed, got hard, cold. He told me they'd destroy me in court, that I'd end up on the street with nothing, that lawyers cost money and probate court would freeze everything, including the house, that I'd lose it all fighting a battle I couldn't win. Then he said the quiet part out loud, the part that made my stomach drop. He said if I didn't hand over the keys voluntarily, they'd make sure I lost everything. The house, the car, the tools, all of it. They'd tie it up in legal hell until the property taxes came due and the bank foreclosed. Then they'd buy it at auction for pennies on the dollar. That was the plan. Not to win in court, just to bleed me dry until I had no choice but to let it all go. He was right. The estate was frozen, but the bills weren't. The property tax bill was sitting on my kitchen table right now, due in 30 days. $7,400 for the first installment. I had $340 in my checking account. He left without another word. The garage door slammed behind him. That sound echoed. I sat down on my work stool, the same one Gramps used. The vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape. I could see the oil stains on the concrete floor where the Mustang usually sat. Dark spots that had been there for months. Years, maybe. In the corner, that stupid tarp was bunched up like a dead animal. I kicked it, hard. My boot connected with the stiff canvas, and it didn't even move. Too heavy, too solid. Just sat there like a monument to my grandfather's stubbornness. A puff of dust flew up from the folds. It didn't smell like normal garage dust. It smelled sharp, acrid, like old chemicals mixed with stale tobacco smoke. I coughed, waving the air in front of my face. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the garage, staring at the oil stain where our Mustang had been sitting, thinking about one simple question. How do you win a fight when you're right, but you're broke? The answer is simple. You don't. Not without money for the war. I found a lawyer the next morning. Not a good one. A cheap one. His name was Johnson, and he worked out a converted garage apartment above a Chinese takeout place on the east side of town. The stairs smelled like General Tso's chicken and mildew. His office had water stains on the ceiling, and a desk that looked like it came from a yard sale. But he was licensed, he was available, and most importantly, he was affordable. Sort of. He told me his retainer was $5,000 up front. That's lawyer speak for pay me now, before I do anything. I didn't have $5,000. I didn't have $1,000. But I had credit cards in desperation, which in America is basically the same thing as having money. I maxed out 3 cards that week. Visa, MasterCard, and a Discover card I'd forgotten I even had. Total credit limit across all 3 was about $4,800. I pulled the rest from my checking account, which left me with basically nothing for groceries or gas or anything resembling a normal life. Then I sold my truck, not the Mustang, my personal vehicle, a 2008 Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles on it and a transmission that whined in third gear. I listed it on Craigslist for $4,000. Some guy from 2 counties overcame and looked at it, pointed out everything wrong with it like I didn't already know, and offered me $3,200 cash. I took it. So now I had $5,000 for Johnson and no way to get to work except bumming rides or taking the bus. The bus in our town runs twice a day and stops running at 6 p.m., which is real helpful when you're a mechanic who sometimes works until 9. But I had a lawyer. That's what mattered. Johnson filed a response to my family's claim. He submitted evidence that Gramps was mentally competent when he wrote the will, medical records, bank statements, testimony from neighbors who talked to him the week before he died. All the standard stuff. And then we waited. That's the thing about probate court. Nobody tells you. It moves at the speed of continental drift. Everything is frozen while the court decides who gets what. Gramps' bank accounts, his retirement fund, even the title to house. All of it locked up tight while lawyers argued and judges reviewed paperwork. Meanwhile, the bills kept coming. Property tax on the house was $14,800 a year. I'd already gotten the first installment notice in Block 1. $7,400 due in 30 days. That deadline was getting closer. Every morning, I woke up in that empty house. I had $340 in my checking account after paying Johnson. The electric bill came, $193. I paid it and watched my balance drop to $147. Then the water bill, then the gas bill for heating, then the insurance on the house, because if I let that lapse, the bank could foreclose immediately. You know what poverty looks like? Real poverty. Not the temporary broke kind, but the kind where you can see the bottom of the well coming up fast. It looks like eating bread with mustard for dinner, because that's what's in the fridge. It looks like turning the heat down to 58 degrees in February and wearing 2 jackets inside your own house. It looks like checking your bank balance 5 times a day, hoping somehow the numbers changed. It looks like understanding that truth doesn't matter if you can't afford to prove it. I picked up every job I could find. Oil changes for $30, brake jobs for $50. I fixed a lawnmower for a neighbor, and he paid me with a case of beer and $20 cash. I took it. I needed the $20 more than I needed pride. Mia stopped by once during this time, brought coffee and donuts from the gas station. I almost cried when she handed them to me because I hadn't eaten anything except ramen and bread in 3 days. She asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push it. Just said if I needed anything to call her. I thanked her and watched her drive away in that beat-up Civic. And I thought about how weird it was that a college kid who could barely afford to fix her car was offering to help me. 6 weeks after the funeral, Johnson called me. Their lawyer wanted to meet. Settlement conference. Bring your checkbook, he said, which was a joke because my checkbook was functionally decorative at that point. We met at Johnson's office. Me, Johnson, my parents, Kyle, and their attorney, a guy named Whitmore who wore a suit that probably cost $3,000 and had the kind of perfect hair that only comes from expensive salons. Whitmore put a document on Johnson's ratty desk. Settlement agreement and mutual release. It's set across the top in bold letters. He explained the terms like he was doing me a favor. My parents would take the Mustang. Full ownership. Clear title. They could sell it or keep it or drive it off a cliff if they wanted. In exchange, I would get the house and everything else on the property. All the tools, all the junk, all the random garage crap that had accumulated over 40 years. They called it the residuary estate, which is lawyer speak for everything nobody bothered to list specifically. Oh, and I'd also get to keep any debts associated with the property. The mortgage was paid off, thank God, but the property tax, the utilities, the maintenance, all mine. Whitmore said if I didn't sign, they'd take this to full probate litigation. That would take 2 years minimum. During that time, everything would stay frozen. The house, the accounts, all of it. And I'd be responsible for maintaining the property the whole time, even though I couldn't access any of Gramps' money to do it. He said I'd lose the house to foreclosure long before the court ever made a decision. Then he smiled. Actually smiled. He said this was their final offer. Sign or spend the next 2 years bleeding out financially while they dragged this through every possible legal channel. I looked at Johnson. He looked tired, defeated. He told me he couldn't win this case fast enough to save the house. Even if we won in 2 years, I'd already be homeless. The litigation costs alone would eat everything. He said to sign it, keep the house, and move on with my life. He was right, and I knew it. But knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. I asked to read the document. Actually read it, not just skim it. It was 12 pages of dense legal text. Most of it was standard boilerplate, whereas this, notwithstanding that, party of the first part. But I read every word anyway, because that's what you do when you're signing away $500,000 worth of car. Page 4, Section 4.b. I read it 3 times. The petitioner and all affiliated parties hereby waive, release, and relinquish any and all claims to the residuary estate, including but not limited to bric-a-brac, tools, hardware, tarps, coverings, personal effects, and any items deemed refuse, junk, or debris situated on or within the premises at the address listed above. The respondent retains full ownership of said items without limitation or future claim. Residuary estate. Everything not specifically listed. Tarps, coverings, refuse, junk, debris. That tarp was junk. They were calling it junk officially. In a legal document. They were waiving all rights to it and anything like it. I remember thinking, well, at least I get to keep Graham's nasty old tarp that ruins everything it touches. What a prize. My hand shook when I signed it. Not from fear, from rage, from humiliation, from the feeling that I was betraying everything Gramps had taught me about standing your ground and not letting people push you around. But I signed it anyway, because sometimes surrender is the only logical move left. They came for the Mustang the next morning. I was in the garage trying to reorganize the tools I get to keep. Wow, what a consolation prize, when I heard the diesel rumble of a heavy truck outside. Tow truck. Big Peterbilt with a hydraulic flatbed. Kyle got out of the car behind it. He was wearing a new suit. Looked expensive. Probably bought it with money he didn't have yet, counting on the Mustang sale to cover it. That's how Kyle operated. Spend first, worry later. Let someone else clean up the mess. He walked into my garage like he owned it, like he'd earned it. The Mustang was still under that tarp. Kyle grabbed one corner and yanked it off in one smooth motion. The sound of canvas ripping away from metal. Sharp, violent. He wadded the tarp up and threw it in the corner like he was tossing out garbage. Told me I could keep my dirty rag, since I loved it so much. Called me Cinderella. Laughed. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I watched them load the Mustang onto flatbed. The tow truck driver knew what he was doing. He started the engine first, neutral, parking brake off, and that sound hit me in the chest like a hammer. That V8 rumble. That deep, throaty burble that Gramps and I had spent months tuning to perfection. The sound of Saturday mornings and terrible jokes and everything good about my life before it all went wrong. Kyle stood there grinning. My mother was filming it on her phone, probably already planning the Instagram post. My father leaned against my workbench, smoking a cigarette like he was the king of the castle. 5 minutes later, they were gone. The garage felt huge suddenly. Empty. The oil stain on the floor where the Mustang had sat for 3 months looked like a crime scene marker. Dark and accusatory. In the corner, that tarp sat in a heap, crumpled up like a body bag, still covered in dust and paint and decades of neglect. The silence after they left was the loudest silence I've ever heard. I could hear the water heater in the next room, the refrigerator humming, my own breathing echoing off the concrete walls. I walked over to the tarp and kicked it, hard. It didn't move. Too heavy. Just sat there like it was mocking me. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That's too poetic. Something deeper. The part of you that keeps you functioning when things are bad. The part that says keep going. It'll get better. You'll survive this. That part broke. I screamed. Just opened my mouth and let it out. Didn't form words. Didn't try to make sense. Just screamed at the empty garage and the oil stain and that stupid tarp until my throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. My voice cracked. I tasted copper. My vocal cords hurt for 3 days after that. When I finally stopped, I sat down on the concrete floor, right there in the middle of the garage. Didn't even grab a chair. Just sat. I cried. Ugly crying. The kind where snot runs down your face, and you can't catch your breath, and you don't care who sees because there's nobody there to see it anyway. I felt like a traitor. Like I'd sold out my grandfather's memory for a roof over my head. Like I'd chosen survival over honor, and that made me weak. But mostly I felt empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in the garage until 2 a.m., just sitting there staring at that oil stain, thinking about how we used to stand right there, me and Gramps, arguing about carburetors and talking about life and pretending we were building something that mattered. The tarp sat in the corner, like a tombstone. I hated it. Hated everything it represented. Hated that it was the only thing I had left of Gramps besides a house I couldn't afford and a pile of tools I'd probably have to sell just to keep the lights on. I thought about burning it. Actually considered it. Dragging it outside, pouring gasoline on it, and watching it turn to ash. Getting rid of the last reminder that I'd lost everything. Thank God I didn't, because 1 month later, my entire life flipped upside down. But that night, I was just a broken man sitting in an empty garage, staring at garbage, wondering how you're supposed to keep living when you've already lost everything that mattered. I hated that tarp. It was the last reminder that I'd failed. And I had no idea that it was worth more than 100 Mustangs. I had no idea it was going to save my life. 1 month after I signed that agreement, I'd lost 15 pounds. Not from exercise, from poverty, from eating once a day, usually ramen noodles or plain bread because that's what I could afford. I looked like a ghost when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under my eyes, clothes hanging loose because I'd sold everything that wasn't nailed down just to keep the lights on. I was taking any work I could find. Oil changes for $30, tire rotations for $20. I fixed lawn mowers, unclogged a neighbor's backed up drain for $50 cash. Even helped another neighbor move furniture for 2 hours in exchange for $40 and a pizza. The pizza was the best meal I'd had in weeks. The garage roof started leaking right around then. Of course it did, because when you're already drowning, the universe likes to add another bucket of water just to see if you'll go under. Water was dripping through a crack in the old shingles, right over where the Mustang used to sit. Poetic in a cruel kind of way. I called 3 roofing companies for estimates. The cheapest quote was $2,000. I had $463 in my checking account, so I did what poor people do. I improvised. That tarp was still sitting in the corner, where Kyle had thrown it. Heavy, stiff, waterproof. I dragged it outside, climbed up on a ladder I'd borrowed from a neighbor, and secured it over the leak with rope and some scrap wood. It took me 3 hours, and I nearly fell twice, but it worked. The dripping stopped. Mia showed up the next day. I hadn't seen her since right after the funeral, when she brought coffee and donuts, and I'd lied about being fine. She pulled up in that beat-up Civic, got out with 2 cups of coffee and a bag from the donut shop, and just looked at me. I must have looked worse than I thought because her face fell. She asked if I was okay. And for some reason, standing there in my garage with borrowed tools and an empty stomach and a tarp on my roof, I couldn't lie anymore. I told her everything. About the settlement. About signing away the Mustang. About living on bread and ramen and selling my truck and barely holding on by my fingernails. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she handed me the coffee and donuts and told me we'd figure something out. I almost cried. Again, it's funny how kindness hits harder when you're at rock bottom. She walked into the garage while I was eating. I was standing on the ladder, adjusting the last rope on the tarp where it covered the roof. She stopped in the doorway, just froze. I thought maybe she'd seen a mouse. We had a lot of them after I stopped being able to afford traps. But she was staring up at the roof, at the tarp. She asked how old it was. I told her more than 70 years. Gramps brought it back from Long Island in the 50s, from some town called East Hampton. He'd been working for a farmer out there. She asked which farmer. I climbed down the ladder and wiped my hands on my jeans. Told her the guy's name was Jackson something. Some drunk farmer who wanted to burn the thing because he thought it didn't breathe or whatever nonsense drunk people think. Mia's hand started shaking. She walked over to where the excess tarp was draped along the side of the building and grabbed the edge. Her fingers were trembling so bad she could barely hold her phone. When she pulled it out, she started taking pictures. Lots of pictures. Close-ups of the paint splatters, the texture, the layers of dried color that looked like they'd been there forever. I asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. She told me to find any records my grandfather kept, any journals, logbooks, anything written down. I remembered Gramps had this old notebook he used to track repair jobs and notes. I'd never read it all the way through, just flipped through it once after he died, saw a bunch of dates and addresses and car models, then put it back in the desk drawer. We found it 10 minutes later. Leather cover, pages yellow with age, Gramps' handwriting in pencil that had faded but was still readable. Mia went through it page by page. August 14th, 1950. East Hampton, Long Island. She read it out loud. Worked for Mr. Jackson today. Farmer. Half a bottle of whiskey before noon. Yelling about the barn floor not breathing. About the paint choking the wood. He wanted to burn the canvas drop cloth he'd been working on. Waste of good material. Told him I'd take it. Save him the trouble. He said to take the damn thing. It reminded him of failure anyway. Rolled it up, threw it in my truck. Might use it to cover tools. Mia looked up from the notebook. Her face was pale. She told me Mr. Jackson wasn't just any farmer. She told me his full name was Jackson Pollock. I laughed. Couldn't help it. Not from joy. From absurdity. I knew who Jackson Pollock was. Sort of. The guy who splattered paint on canvas. And somehow, that became worth millions. I'd seen prints in waiting rooms. Those chaotic drip paintings that looked like a kindergartner went nuts with a bucket. I told Mia she was tired. That this was a stretch. That some drunk farmer with the same last name as a famous artist didn't mean the tarp was worth anything. She told me Pollock lived in Springs, a hamlet in East Hampton, in the late 40s and early 50s. That he painted on the floor of his barn. That he used industrial house paint, automotive enamel, literally anything he could pour and drip. That he died in 1956 drunk in a car crash. She told me if she was right, I was standing next to $50 million. I didn't believe her, but in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Hope. 2 days later, we were at the university. Mia had called her professor, a woman named Dr. Emily Chun, who specialized in art authentication. We spread the tarp out in a lab that smelled like chemicals and old paper. Dr. Chun put on white gloves like she was handling a bomb. She took a scalpel and scraped off a microscopic flake of paint, put under a microscope hooked up to a computer. Then she asked me if I was a mechanic. I said yes. She asked if I knew what Duco paint smelled like. The nitrocellulose enamel GM used on car bodies in the 50s. Of course I did. I'd restored dozens of cars from that era. You never forget that smell, sharp chemical, with notes of acetone that burn your nose. She held the paint chip up to my nose, told me to smell it. That scent hit me like a freight train. Duco, 100%. The exact same smell as the 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air I'd restored 2 years ago. Dr. Chin explained that Jackson Pollock didn't use artist paints. He used automotive enamel. Duco brand, mixed with aluminum radiator paint. No other artist in the 1950s did that. It was his signature, his fingerprint. She told me this wasn't artist paint. This was car paint, mechanic paint. My world, intersecting with his world, 70 years ago. Then she opened a program on her computer, uploaded high-resolution photos of the tarp. She explained that Pollock's drip paintings weren't random. They created fractal patterns, mathematical structures that repeat at different scales. In 1999, a physicist proved that every Pollock has a unique fractal signature, like a fingerprint, mathematically impossible to fake. Numbers appeared on the screen. Fractal dimension, D equals 1.67. Confidence level, 94.3%. Pattern signature. Matched to known Pollock works, 1948 through 1952. She told me 1.67 was Pollock's exact average fractal dimension during his peak period. If this was a forgery, it would require mathematical precision that didn't exist in the 1950s. I didn't understand half the words she used, but I understood 94.3%. That's not a coincidence. That's certainty. Dr. Chin turned on an ultraviolet lamp. The tarp lit up like a Christmas tree, different layers of paint glowing in different colors, showing years of buildup. She pointed to a small dark spot in the lower right corner. Cigarette ash embedded in the paint. She told me Pollock was a chain smoker. Camel cigarettes, no filter. Ash fell on his work constantly while he painted. Then she pointed to something else. A tiny shape preserved in the dried paint. A fly, trapped in the lacquer 75 years ago. Organic inclusions, she called them, impossible to fake. Proof of authenticity. She told me this was real. This was a Jackson Pollock. Canvas floor covering from his studio in Springs. The actual surface he painted on, not a painting. The place where paintings were born. She said history costs more than beauty. I sat down on the floor of that lab. Just sat down because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. The next day, Sotheby's called. The voice on the phone had a British accent. Posh. The kind of accent that only exists when you spent your life around money. He told me they'd completed authentication. Confirmed it was genuine. Jackson Pollock, circa 1949 to 1950. Studio floor canvas from Springs. Provenance verified to my grandfather's logbook. Estimated auction value, $40 to $60 million. They were sending an armored truck tomorrow to collect it for secure storage. I dropped the phone, literally dropped it. Sat there in my garage staring at the oil stain where the Mustang used to be. Staring at the hole in the roof I'd patched with that tarp. Staring at the walls that desperately needed paint and the tools I'd almost sold just to eat. I cried, not from happiness, from absurdity, from the cosmic joke of it all, from the understanding that life is a roulette wheel where you can lose everything and win everything without knowing which spin matters. The auction happened 3 weeks later at Sotheby's in New York. They offered me a VIP box to watch in person. I said no, couldn't handle it. Instead, I watched the live stream in my garage on Mia's laptop. Lot 47, Jackson Pollock. Studio floor canvas, circa 1949 to 1950. Provenance, Arthur Williams Estate. Starting bid, $25 million. The bidding lasted 11 minutes. Phone bids from London, China, Saudi Arabia. The numbers climbed like a rocket. 30 million, 35, 42, 48. The hammer fell at $52 million. After Sotheby's took their 12% commission, I cleared $45,760,000. I wrote that number down on paper just to make sure it was real. Mia was crying. I was crying. We didn't celebrate. We just sat there in silence because what do you even say when your life changes that much in 11 minutes? You know what's weird? I didn't feel happy. I felt calm, like a weight lifted off my chest that I'd been carrying so long, I forgot it was there. I wasn't afraid of the mailbox anymore. Wasn't afraid of the bank. Wasn't afraid of anything. First thing I did was pay off Graham's probate estate. $47,000. Closed all his debts. Then I bought new tools for the garage. Not because the old ones were bad. Just because I could. 1 week later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. It was Officer Rodriguez from the County Traffic Division. He told me my brother Kyle had been in an accident. 11:17 p.m. that night. Lost control of a vehicle. A 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. Total loss. Kyle was alive but banged up. Broken collarbone, concussion. Blood alcohol level 0.14%. Almost double the legal limit. I hung up the phone. Didn't go to the hospital. Didn't call my parents. Just sat there staring out the window. The next morning, the local news showed photos. Our Mustang, Graham's and mine, crushed like a tin can. Hood crumpled into the windshield. Engine half destroyed. Rear end torn off. Headline: Local man crashes 500K classic Mustang while drunk. They didn't know it was worth more than that. Didn't know how much soul we'd poured into it. They only saw the price tag. Kyle filed an insurance claim. They denied it. DUI clause. When you're drunk, insurance doesn't pay. Nothing. Even if the car is worth $500,000. He lost everything. My parents lost everything too. They'd invested in the insurance thinking it was a safe bet. Now they had a son with medical bills. And nothing else. And then they saw the news about me. Local mechanic sells junk tarp for $52 million. It was a Jackson Pollock. My mother called. Screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Told me I knew. That I'd tricked them. That I'd stolen their inheritance. I told her I didn't know. That I found out a month after the settlement. That they'd signed a legal document calling it junk. She told me the court would recognize it was a mistake. That half that money belonged to them. I hung up. She called 17 more times. I blocked the number. 2 weeks later, a process server knocked on my door. They'd filed suit. $26 million. Half the auction proceeds. Grounds: mutual mistake of fact and unconscionable contract. Their new lawyer, even more expensive than the first one, argued they couldn't have known the tarp's value, that the settlement should be voided. I hired the best attorney in New York, Margaret Stone, 58 years old, Wall Street shark, $850 an hour. I could afford it now. The court hearing lasted 40 minutes. Their lawyer talked for 20 minutes about fairness, about how nobody could have known, about how unjust it was that I got everything. When he finished, Margaret stood up. She placed one document on the table, the settlement agreement. She asked the judge for permission to read section 4, be allowed. Her voice was calm, clinical, not loud, not angry, just factual. The petitioner and all affiliated parties hereby waive, release, and relinquish any and all claims to the residuary estate, including but not limited to bric-a-brac, tools, hardware, tarps, coverings, personal effects, and any items deemed refuse, junk, or debris situated on or within the premises. She looked at the judge. She explained that the plaintiffs had classified the object as refuse, garbage, that they'd officially waived all rights to it in a signed contract, that this was textbook estoppel by contract. They couldn't claim a share of something they'd officially called trash and abandoned. The judge nodded. Motion to dismiss granted. Dismiss with prejudice. Plaintiffs ordered to pay defendants' legal costs. With prejudice means they can't file again. Ever. The legal costs came to $47,000. My parents had to pay. I walked out of the courthouse. They were standing by the steps. My mother crying. My father staring at me with pure hatred. Kyle on crutches from the accident. They waited for me to say something. To offer them money out of pity. To forgive them. I walked past without a word. I haven't spoken to them since. Complete no contact. Cut them out of my life like a tumor. 3 months after the auction, I found our Mustang on Copart. Online auction for salvage vehicles. Lot number 478-8392. Salvage title. Starting bid $500. I won it for $4,200. Paid $800 for shipping. When the truck delivered it, I almost didn't recognize it. It was a skeleton. Body crushed. Frame bent. Engine destroyed. But it had our VIN number. 9F02M and 6 more digits I'd memorized years ago. It was ours. I didn't buy a new house. I built one. 3 stories. But the best part was a garage. 1,200 square feet. Heated floor. Professional lift. $50,000 worth of tools. Mia moved in 6 months later. She finished her master's in art history. We got married a year after that. Small wedding. Just friends. No family. And I started rebuilding the Mustang. Not to sell. For me. For Gramps. First day I tore into the interior. I found something in the glove box. Kyle had missed it in his rush to show off. An old photograph. Gramps and me. I was 12. We were standing next to another Mustang, his first one from 1965. On the back, in his handwriting, Leo, 2007. My first student. My best friend. I held that photo and cried. First time in months, I cried from something other than anger or fear or absurdity. I cried because the soul of the car had come back. Gramps had come back. People ask me if I regret giving them the Mustang. No, because that Mustang was theirs. It represented greed. The one I'm rebuilding now, that's mine. Every bolt I install is a prayer to my grandfather's memory. They saw $500,000. I saw priceless. The tarp sold for $52 million. The car was worth $500,000. But Gramps' memory? That has no price. Now I have time. Time to fix the car. Time to fix myself. Time to live without fear. I turned on the garage radio. Same old transistor Gramps used. Miles Davis. Kinda Blue. Picked up my grinding wheel. That same high-pitched whine from 3 years ago when we were finishing the first Mustang together. I touched the metal of the wrecked car. Cold, bent, broken, but it was mine, and I knew I could bring it back. They saw price. I saw value. And now, with the grinding wheel in my hands and my grandfather's music in the air, I understood something fundamental. Real revenge isn't destroying them. Real revenge is building yourself back up, bolt by bolt, memory by memory, until your soul shines brighter than chrome. That tarp saved my life. But Gramps, he saved my soul. And every day I work on this car, I'm keeping that promise we made in this garage 3 years ago. To do it right, to take our time, to build something that matters. They got the money they thought they wanted. I got everything that actually mattered. And that's the difference between price and value. That's the difference between winning and living.